All right, Matt, I'm going to share. Do you have permission? Two people are going to share. Actually, Mark Gardner, are you logged on? Make sure Mark is everything set. Is Mark on?
His audio is off.
Now I'm here.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right, you're good, Mark. All right, good. And we're all set. All right. I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to start the meeting. And let me see. Blah blah blah. Okay, everybody. Oh wait, I need to share screen first. See, I'm share screen. Desktop. Share. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Matt, we good?
Yes.
Yep. All right, good. All right, welcome everybody. February 10th, 2021, from the Central Jersey Woodworking Association. And after tonight's presentation from Master Carver Mary May, we should all be able to do this tomorrow.
Yes.
Central Jersey Woodworking Association. If you're new to the club, we do have a book and video online library. Our online library you can check out at our website. Don't worry about the 1 month lending period because mine is overdue about a year. Member discounts. We do have benefits of local vendors, lumber, tools, and hardware. Check out our members area of our website. We do have tool libraries available. If you're new to the club, we do have like a bench press. We have some bench tools. You can say I was just downstairs. Anyhow, we have some tools available, and Mark Gardner, who keeps an accurate inventory of everything we have and where it is located at all times. We also have a great package for SketchUp Pro. It's a little over $30 a year. It's a great deal if you're interested in doing that kind of work. So by all means, check that out if you're interested. So you can check all this out in our members area of our website. Dues, checks, like we said at the last meeting, checks in the amount of $50 should have been sent to Doug Pori, our illustrious treasurer. Payable, you could put on the check, make your check payable if you have not done so yet, payable to the Central Jersey Woodworking Association or CJWA for short. It still will work in cash. And a mail check to that Doug's address there. And if you don't worry about that now, you can get it right off the front page of our website. Just make sure you mail it to Doug this year, since we are not meeting live and in person. But please, folks, we need the checks out. Even though we're not meeting live, we don't have snacks. We are having guest presenters such as Mary May and others. And that's where our funds are going this winter to help out the people that keep our craft going. All right, last month we had our election, and Robert Henson did the chair duties, and there's our slate of officers that were elected. President is me, Vice President Jim Braun, meeting program chair Mark Gardner, Treasurer Doug Pori, Secretary is Matt Geen, and when we do meet in person and we have all our books out, we'll need a librarian at that point, so keep that in mind, folks. Last month we had a tour of Winterthur Museum. If you didn't get a chance to join us, the link is available. You have to see Matt if you can't find it. Matt Geen, our secretary, our new secretary. But we had a wonderful tour of back scenes, and some of the great works you see here in this picture. We're back in the lab, the conservatory lab, and we got a good tour back there. It was a wonderful, wonderful evening. The woodworking shows this year are happening, but supposedly it's virtual. I checked again today. There is nothing on their website yet. Spoke to Chuck Bender, and he says they're all planned on going. It's going to be event supposedly in March, no specific date. Tickets will be available. And I think the price of a ticket will get you into all the vendors are going to be having like chat rooms going on, and you could click onto a vendor if you're interested in purchasing a tool or knowledge. But also there's going to be seminars, virtual seminars, if you want to learn about certain things. So you can screen down and see if it's for you. But when we get information, we'll all share it, because right now there's nothing on their website as of now, other than they're still in the planning stages of the virtual woodworking show. It's not going to be obviously city to city. It's going to be one event, and I think that event will be a March weekend. This was us last year at the garden in New Jersey. Also, Jim Braun got this. Somebody contacted Jim. If you didn't get a chance to check this out last year, I think there was some links going around. The Shaper Origin, which is I'll call it a smart router, for lack of a better term. It's a programmable router that you can, with a certain platform, use it on, and you can use it to do very intricate work with this device and machine. I think 1 or 2 of our club members use it, and they speak highly of it. So if you're interested in that, a demo link will be coming out to your mailbox soon. The crafts auction, which we normally, I think would have been this past weekend, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, is moved due to the snow that we had. We're actually having a winter here in Jersey, Mary. So the crafts auction, which is an antique and used tool auction, is moved to February 28th due to too much snow in the parking lot. They didn't get the cleaned out the parking lot. So the way things are going, I don't know if they're going to be cleared by the 28th, but stay tuned for that. And you can check on their website also, crafts.org. Next month, we have Garrett Hack joining us from parts up north. And he'll be doing a presentation from in his shop. And so looking forward, we haven't worked out the details, the topics and things like that. If there's anything you want to see or specific, please shoot me an email and I'll pass it forward. And then we also do need a member presentation for next month. Bill Woodard actually wants to share a beekeeping house, a shed that he built for his hobby of beekeeping. So we'll have that as one, and we'd like to have 1 or 2 more shares on that for next month. So stay tuned. That's next month. March 10th is put that on your calendars for the next virtual meeting. Tonight, we're very proud to present Mary May. And then after Mary May has done her presentation, Mark Gartner and myself, I'm going to skedaddle out into my shop, and we're going to be going over some table saw jigs, fixtures, all in the name of safety and productivity. So and then if you have pictures to share, by all means, have them ready. If you want to share something after Mary's talk, this is what we're going to do tonight. And hopefully we'll all learn something and clear up maybe some safety issues. So thank you for everybody for joining us. Thank you if you already have sent your dues in to Doug. If you have not done so, please do so. We do need the money to pay our guests coming through spring. I made some more contacts up to May even tonight. So we were booking guests until we can meet live, guests that we normally wouldn't have in New Jersey area. So without further ado, you're all here to see the Queen of Carving, as you would call her. I did have the, let me exit out of here, stop share. I did have the fortune of being in one of Mary's classes. This was in Rockland, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And Mary is just a very, very pleasant personality, very knowledgeable, just a wonderful teaching style. If you're not aware of her work, please visit her website, check her online school out. She teaches in person at many different schools. You can check her calendar schedule. And also she has such an abundance, what I think over 200 online classes available. If you just want to say carve a ball and claw foot, she has that, or a canthus leaf, or a flower. There's so many episodes you can check out, and it's so well done. Mary's done a great job, and it's such an honor to have you joining us in central New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever been in New Jersey before. You might have just been passing through, unfortunately, like a lot of people on the turnpike. But we have a great state and we have many good workers. So welcome to our club.
Well, thank
Over to you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, it is, oh, I think it got up to about 60 degrees here in Charleston, South Carolina. So not to rub it in all. So yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I know I think I have about an hour. I won't drag it on too long. We could go till midnight if you want. I mean, there's been times when it's just, you know, you get on a roll and like, you got to put the brakes on. I wonder if there's like a thing you can quickly mute me. It's like, nope, she's going too far. It's gone too far. One of those.
No, don't worry about it. You do what you have to do. And if we start falling asleep, we'll let you know, but you'll be fine.
Well, I'm going to be going over just a couple of basics on the techniques that I use for very traditional carving. I was trained in that European traditional technique of carving using the long handled gouges and clamping everything to the workbench, as opposed to holding carving in your hand and using small knives or gouges or anything like that. Personally, I don't like to bleed. That's why I clamp it down to the bench. Keep all body parts away from the blade, preferably. So, but my teacher, I had actually gone to Europe as a study abroad when I was in college. And I absolutely fell in love with the carvings in the cathedrals and the churches and just those grand homes and the castles in Europe. And I ended up going to Germany and places and absolutely fell in love with the details of them and not really even realizing that it could be done anymore. I thought it was, you know, I was about 200 or 300 years too late. So I got back to the States and I was living in Minneapolis at the time. So I do understand cold. I was living in Minneapolis and I looked in the yellow pages. It's that really big yellow book. It's now called Google. And they looked under wood carving and found Artistic Wood Carving Studio. Now I called the number and I thought, oh, that sounds perfect. I called the number and this Konstantinos Papadakis answered the phone with a very strong Greek accent. And he said, yes, come by, and we'll see, I'll show you my workshop. And 3 years I studied with him and learned that very traditional style of, you know, the acanthus leaves and that scrolling and the shells and all those things that you imagine when you are going through some of these cathedrals and castles and decorations of the whole walls covered in this. So I started studying with him very, very traditional techniques, and that's what I'm going to be showing you. About 9 years ago, the economy was kind of going a little bit of a downturn in my world anyway. That's when I started my online school. So having a woodcarver board is not a good thing because I didn't have a lot of work. So I thought, oh, what can I do? I still want to carve. So I started this online school and I started making videos, and that's been going on for 9 years now. And I make another video every week. And so that's just marymaycarving.com. There's a bunch of free things on there. If you're just wanting to start out with wood carving, learning how to sharpen, learning how to do basic techniques, how to hold the tools, all that, there's a bunch of free videos there. I've also got some YouTube videos if you want to follow the very similar what is on my free section on the school and what is on YouTube. So it's very similar free lessons. So dive in and watch as much as you want with that. Let's see. I'm just going to get into, I'm going to switch cameras. Bear with me. I'm going to do a screen share. That's down at the bottom, right? Yes. Bear with me. It might take a little bit to figure this out. Okay. Okay. There we are. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger, okay, while I'm still rambling on. And full screen. All right. So, all right, there's all sorts of little busy stuff on my screen, but hopefully you can see what's going on. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so I wanted to talk about just about a lot about the tools and things that I use, because I think, as I said, a lot of times people consider wood carving it maybe whittling or something like that, maybe the caricatures, but this is really that very traditional technique and using the long handled gouges. Now, if anybody has any questions throughout this, if you want to, I don't know if it was Bob, it would maybe you be answering the questions or asking questions. Anyway, you can either type it in or I don't know how you do that if you want to raise your hand or whatever.
There, I would say the best thing, if anybody has a question, because we have over 30 people logged on, I can keep track, and I don't know if Matt can. Just unmute yourself and at appropriate time and ask Mary a question. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Okay, that's fine. And that's why I'm sort of aiming in a particular direction that I'm going to try to cover today, but sometimes questions will make you go in all different directions. So I'm flexible. So, all right. So I'm going to start out talking about some of the tools and some of the equipment that I use. Now, I use these fingerless bicycle gloves quite often. And because what I like to do is I like to actually, as I'm carving, there's quite often times when I'm literally like closing my eyes and actually feeling the surface of the wood. So I like to have the fingers so I can actually feel something. But the thing about these gloves is quite often they have padding here. And the only reason really that I use the gloves is because this side of my hand actually gets worn and pretty bad callus if I don't use the gloves. I probably use gloves maybe like 20% of the time that I'm carving. And that's really when I'm using very hard woods like mahoganies or oak or something like that, which I can actually cut the side of my hand with the sharp edges of the wood. It doesn't stop from cutting with a gouge, all right? As I said, hold the gouge away from you, point the gouge away from all body parts. And that's why I like to hold it clamped to the bench. So bicycle gloves, weightlifting gloves, something with a little bit of padding. They do have these gloves, which I couldn't find them. I was trying to find them before. They're Kevlar gloves, full gloves that actually have a Kevlar material that stops slicing cuts, not stabbing cuts. So if you are holding something in your hand, it's always a good idea to use gloves like that to protect, but I really don't like using that. I don't like using that technique at all, just because of the blade in your fingers. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I've got some close-up cameras here. Oops. And I want to talk about some of the mallets. There's I use, get that centered. Okay, so these are two different kinds. We've got some steel ones, we've got some brass ones, just regular turned ones. Ideally, the mallets that I use are between a pound and a pound and a half. And these ones are really nice because they're really compact. And when I actually use them, I end up using them like this quite often, just sort of very light tapping. And by being able to wrap my hand around the head of the mallet, it's a little easier for this. So when you've got the really big, massive wood turned ones, it's just a little bit more bulky. These are great for just doing heavy pounding. And this is actually a lignum vitae wood, and it's a really heavy, dense one. So the metal ones, they can be a little bit more compact, a little bit smaller, so that I can do that type of work. Now I also do stone carving, so this is very similar to the stone carving technique of letter carving in stone, very similar shape. And it just works really nice. If you had, hold on a second, let me just show you. Let's just say, this is just something I inherited, all right, an old turned mallet. A lot of times just standard turned mallets are not quite heavy enough to really do some of that really substantial pounding. So what I do is I actually drill in a hole and add in maybe some type of metal with some epoxy, and it weights down the head a little bit. And then that makes the head actually can be a little smaller than this, as long as you can weight down that to bring it up to, pound and a half. I actually kind of go in between there. About 1 1/3 pounds is pretty ideal for my arms. So it really depends. Lighter than 1 pound ends up being, you're actually having to physically force the mallet, and it doesn't really do the job that it's supposed to. Anything heavier than 1 1/2 pounds, it wears your arm out too much. Okay, so those are the mallets. Get out of the way. And okay, the types of wood that I would recommend starting out with are basswood, a nice light colored wood, light colored, light grain, soft. In England and Europe, they call it lime wood or linden. And so that's usually what I recommend starting out with. If you are near a woodcraft supply store, they quite often have basswood. The problem is it's not really something very easy to find. In the north, it's great. I mean, I get mine from Wisconsin. If you get southern basswood, if you get basswood that is like from Georgia or Tennessee, it will end up being too kind of stringy. So you really want to get basswood that is very northern, cold winters, very solid wood. And you can see, actually, let me just show you some of the difference. I've got a couple different ones here. I don't know if you can see the difference in the color. Now one is a little bit older too, it's been sitting around my shop, but you can see the difference in color. These are both basswood. This is the Wisconsin basswood. And I don't know what this one is. Again, it's probably been oxidized a bit over the years, but there is a difference in the basswoods. And sometimes the southern basswood just doesn't quite have that real solid nature to it. Okay, another wood.
Mary, I don't know if it's just me, but I think that the way your camera is set up, when you have things on your bench, I can't see them. I don't know if other people have the same experience or if I've just done something with mine.
Anybody else have that?
No, I'm seeing fine. That is Simon. You should have on your screen, you should have Mary, 2 views of Mary, one on the upper left, and the large screen should be her camera focused on her bench. You cannot see that?
No, but I'll figure it out. But thanks, Bob. So now I know where the problem is.
Simon,
Okay, very good, sir.
hey Simon, it's Matt. Set your screen view to side by side.
Or set it to full screen.
Yeah, either one.
Way in the
Thanks,
upper
guys.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so there's a couple other types of wood. This is butternut. Now this actually, they call this white walnut. It is of the family of walnut, but it's very lightweight. Unfortunately, butternut is, I think there's like a canker worm or fungus or something like that. I can't remember exactly the details, but anyway, a lot of the butternut trees are now dying. So what you're going to find now are pretty much either that from trees that have already fallen. I'm hoping that they will come back because it is really a nice wood to carve and it's got some beautiful grain to it. So if you look at the back, you can make it look like oak. You can make it look like walnut if you wanted to stain it. It's a nice soft wood. I wouldn't recommend building anything with it because the same as basswood, it's just, it's more for decorative pieces, not necessarily building just because of strength. So butternut is another one if you can find it. It's kind of on the same level as basswood, just a little bit more interesting to work. And then you can always use the hardwoods like walnut, and then we've got the mahogany. And here's another mahogany. And some of these are some of these pieces that I'm showing you are some of the video lessons that I have on how to carve. I have this on there as a lesson. This is actually part of my book, this one. Ooh, I have to show my book. I have to sneak that one in there. Yes, 3 years ago, I carved my very first carved. I carved my very first book. I wrote my very first book. Actually, I did carve my way through this book. It sort of felt like it. But carving the acanthus leaf, and if you're not familiar with what an acanthus leaf is, and I'm always amazed when I go teach a carving class, at least half the people in my carving class have never heard the word acanthus leaf. And so I obviously have chosen to write a book on something ridiculously obscure. So anyway, the acanthus leaf is that thing that you see everywhere, that decorative scrolling leaf that you pretty much see everywhere. Anything that is that leaf that sort of is continuous and scrolling, this type of thing is an acanthus leaf. All right, that's an antique that I got when I was over in England. That is considered an acanthus leaf. Anyway, there's all types of different things. So I got 13 different designs of acanthus leaves in my book. And there's another one, believe it or not, that also is considered an acanthus leaf, but more like the Greek Corinthian capital design. And what's fascinating about writing on the acanthus leaf, when you write about anything, and I think this probably goes for any topic at all, you think you know a lot about it before you start writing the book, and then you realize that you know nothing about it. And I could probably end up writing another entire volume and not run out of things to talk about the acanthus leaf. So anyway, so where was I? I was, okay. So when I'm talking about working with the actual workspace. Okay, so I have this workbench that is basically, it's got this side vise with a nice vise in there. And what I do is I use, oh, let me get me out of here. Sorry. I just use the bench dogs and clamp my work in between the bench dogs. All right, very conveniently. And that is really probably the easiest way to do this type of relief carving. Clamp those. Again, you can end up taking this down here. I'm working on it like this, and I don't have to hold it. I don't have to worry about it. It is held very tightly like that. All right, so that really is probably, for the relief carving anyway, is probably 80% of the way that I hold the wood that I work. And I wanted to show another thing. Let's just say, this is actually the piece that I'm going to be showing how to carve later. This has been cut out on a bandsaw or scroll saw, however you cut out the flat wood blank. And then I attach it to this temporary backer board with double-sided tape. Now the double-sided tape that I use is golf grip tape. Now you can use carpet tape, you can use woodworker's tape, but if any of you are golfers, you know what that is. It's a double-sided tape that you wrap around your handle of the golf club and then slide the handle on, and then it holds it. Then when you're finished with it, or you want to change out the handle, you pour a solvent into it and it releases the tape. Okay, so when you think about that, this is holding this very nicely. I can clamp the backer board and not have the clamps anywhere near my carving. This works really well for delicate pieces. Okay, so I can carve, it holds very tightly. Then when I'm finished with the carving, what I do is I either, if it's a more sturdy piece, I take a flat chisel and I go along the back and I just lift it and do a little bit of prying and it pops up. Okay, the tape releases. If the tape doesn't release, and don't force it, if the tape doesn't release, then just go along the edge with the solvent. I use lacquer thinner for this, and it soaks into the tape and it very, very gently releases it. And it works great, especially if you got the really, really delicate, fragile carvings. Okay, so I'm going to be going with that a little bit later. Ideal workbench height is about, this a little bit larger, just maybe elbow or a little bit below elbow height. If you end up kind of having to lean over too much. If you're working on it all day, it can get really hard on your back. So that's about the height. So normal workbench, I usually raise it up about 6 inches, just for comfort. Let's just see if I'm missing anything here. So, oh yeah.
Now, do you ever use a stool at all, especially if you're carving many hours? Do you ever use a stool? And or do you find that messes up your posture?
It's not the posture necessarily, it's the leverage. Let me see if I can do this, but basically I'm gonna redirect this, bear with me. I want to show you the positioning, so I'm just going to enlarge this. So basically, as I'm carving, I do a lot of this work and back and side and leaning into it. And what happens is if I sit down, and I do when I'm doing a little delicate, tiny work, but if I'm really doing some, getting into the carving, I find that I have to actually move too much. If I'm sitting, it's kind of more restrictive and I can't really lean into it. However, there's been a lot of students of mine who simply can't stand for that long. And what happens is, so you can sit down, but what happens is it's more using your shoulders and your muscles because you're having to push more rather than leaning into it. You can still do it, but it's just a different technique. It's using different muscles. And I've actually had some students in wheelchairs, and they actually put this little table workbench over the arms of the wheelchair, and then they are able to push that way. Again, it just requires more pushing strength with your shoulders rather than leaning in. I tend to do a lot of really just leaning right over the carving, and sitting even on a stool doesn't really allow you to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna go in, if there's any more questions with that, I'm gonna talk about the tools that I use. Let me just bring these into.
Mary, I have a question about your table.
Yes.
You have square bench dogs, which I also do, and I've never seen it anywhere else. When you got the table, did it come with the dogs or did you have to reproduce them?
Well, what came with the dogs, what came with the bench were the metal bench dogs.
Ah,
They are really damaging to wood. So, I mean, if you want to be protect the carvings, you want to be careful with that. But this came with it. These are all made. These are all handmade. And you know what? If you want to make your own, I know that there's plans out there, because it's got a nice little spring right here, right? And it looks like that little spring there is just attached right there all the way.
yeah.
Okay.
No,
And then-
I made a few and they work adequately, but I wondered if anybody could actually, does anybody make the square bench dogs?
Good question, because all the ones that I have are homemade. So
Okay.
I would think maybe you should start making them,
Yeah.
selling them.
All right, thanks.
Yep, sure. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the tools that I prefer are the long handled ones. All right, anywhere from maybe 9 to 11 inches long. And the reason I like these is because when you're using them, I use both hands, and it's much more control and it's a lot safer to use. There's a lot more guidance. All right, left and right hand. So one hand always holds on to the wood, one hand always holds on to the metal. And the way to make sure that you're positioning these correctly is make sure that your thumbs are basically pointing towards each other. Okay, I mean, shifting a little bit, but rather than this, okay, which is a little bit harder to control. But this way, you're pretty much always going to make sure that this blade is on that side of your hand, okay? And now I really encourage you also to make sure, or depending on whether you're right or left hand, work on switching your hand back and forth, because in the process of carving, there's going to be that time where you just cannot reach it from one direction. Okay, so right and left hand is really important. When I teach a class, usually after the first day, And after sort of forcing through that really awkward discomfort, usually after the first day of carving, the right and left hand are pretty equally comfortable. Excuse me. Now, as I'm carving, I have this callus right there. You can kind of see this. It's not a bone. Not so much on this side because I'm definitely right-handed, but there's a callus right there, and that's because as I'm carving, that is touching something all the time, whether it's your bench, whether it's the surface of the carving, because that is what guides it, okay? If I'm carving and it's not touching anything, there's really no control. So that's what guides it, and then just moves it, okay? So same thing, right and left hand. This little part of the hand right there is what is that heel. Okay, so looking at some of these tools, I'm just going to go through some of these. And so you've got the standard straight shaped, and then you've got the fishtail. And I prefer the fishtail. And I think once you start carving, I think, and you try it carving with a fishtail, see it sort of splays out like that. I think you'll discover that it's just so much nicer to get into little corners. This is pretty standard. That's really what we're familiar with seeing, is just the straight shaped gouge. But once I started buying fishtails, those are the only ones I ever use. They're strong enough. They're just as strong as the other ones. And yet they're basically like a skew chisel, where they actually go into the corners a little tighter. And they're just not as bulky. Oh, excuse me, need to get a drink. Throat's getting dry. Okay, so just going to go through some of these other ones. Let me just talk to you a little bit about the numbering system. Okay, so let me just get a piece of paper here and I'll explain how this works. Bear with me. Okay, so separate. So basically, we're going to start out with a flat chisel, which is a number 1. Okay, and then it starts going up a little bit curved. That's number 2. Even more curved, number 3. Okay, number 4. All the way to a number 11, which is a U shape. Okay, now if you look closely at these, we've got a number 3, 14 millimeters. Okay, so number 3, the first number refers to the curvature or sweep, and the second number refers to the width in millimeters, and that's the width from corner to corner. So this is a number 314, number 3 curvature, and 14 millimeters wide. Excuse me. This is a number 514. Sometimes they're stamped on here. Sometimes if you get older ones, you just have to kind of guess with them. They don't have the stamps. But this is a number 5 curvature. You can see it's a little bit more curved than the number 3. You can see that. 14 millimeters. And let's see, this is a smaller one. This is a number 3, 6 millimeter, number 3 curvature, 6 millimeters wide. Okay, so generally the European brands are all numbered that way. And I would recommend German, Swiss. I'm going to read those off really quickly. There's a couple brands that are really, really good quality. So there's a couple English brands, German, Swiss, Austrian. Okay, so let me just read some of these real quickly. And I don't know if I could probably actually supply this paper that I have. But I've got this in, okay, the Ariou, which is French, A-U-R-I-O-U. That if you're familiar with the rasps, the Ariou rasps, they just have a very limited amount of carving gouges, but they have some really nice fishtails. There's the Dastra, they're German. Those are the ones that I started out with. Unfortunately, they closed down last year. and sold their company after 180 years of being in business. They closed down, and I think one of the other big German tool companies bought them out. That's what I heard. File Swiss, or Swiss made, which is probably the most available that you can find. You can walk into a woodcraft supply store and buy that. I've got a company up in Canada called CJWA that sells their sort of my preferred brand or set of tools, and that's also a Swiss made. The File Swiss made. It's probably the only tool, or one of the only tools, where you can really go into a store and actually look at them. Most of the other ones are all online. Stubai, Austrian. That's another good one. Two Cherry, German. Henry Taylor and Addis. Henry Taylor is English, and Addis is English vintage and antique. Okay, so if you're ever looking at antiques of carving gouges, it's ADDIS. There's another one that I didn't put on that list. It's another German company called Hirsch, and I think Hirsch is the one that bought out Dastra. So if you're looking for that, Dastra. Excuse me. Now I wanted to also show you kind of a recommended starter set. I just wrote this up earlier. And so if you're just getting started, that's always the biggest question, is what do you start out with? And so I just quickly wrote this up. And that's why I mentioned Chipping Away has this set for sale, and it's Swiss made file. But a lot of times when you buy a set of gouges, I'm convinced that they put these sets together and they throw in about 2 or 3 that they just simply don't sell because they have to get rid of them. So I'm convinced of that. A lot of times there's, you can buy a set of 7 or 8 tools, and at least 2 of them you'll probably never touch. So I don't always recommend buying sets in that way. But this is basically the starting 6mm V-chisel. Let me show you what the V-chisel is. Okay, so this is a V-chisel shaped like a V, comes down to the corner. And I use this a lot for removing a lot of wood. When I start a carving project, I sort of outline it quite often with a V-chisel. And I prefer the 60-degree angle. These come in, I believe, like 45 and 50 degrees, 60 degrees, and then I think 75 and 90. I'm not sure about the other ones because I never buy anything other than 60-degree angles. Anything larger, it just ends up being kind of awkward. Anything really tighter than this, like a 45-degree, ends up being actually really miserable to sharpen. So you get such a sharp angle that you can't fit anything into it to sharpen it. And it really doesn't do much good anyway. It's not necessary to have it that thin. Okay, so I've got a number 3 6mm, number 3 14mm, number 5 14, number 7 6, and 7 14. So basically we've got the number 3s, the number 5s, and the number 7s. And then 3 6, 3 14. So basically a 6mm and a 14mm. All right. And you can also, if you wanted to add another one to this one, I would recommend the number 5 6mm. Okay, so we're saying 3, 5s, and 7s in the 6 and 14mm. Okay, and that's sort of a general shape for doing the kind of carving that I do. It's not for the really big, chopping out and removing mass amounts of wood. It's for the more sort of relief carving, and you want to have a little bit of control over it. You want to be able to do as many shapes as you can. And this is a good starting set. Beyond this, I would probably move into 10mm. Okay, so number 3, 10mm, number 5, 10mm, and number 7, 10mm. And then you might want to go even further, more curved ones. Okay, so because like I said, they go all the way up to a number 11, and it's really the larger curved ones are more for just removing a lot of wood. So it just depends on what you're going to be using. If you're doing big sculptures, then you're going to want something much larger. This is a little bit more delicate carving, a little bit more controlled. And if you can get a hold of fishtails in any of these, I would definitely recommend that shape. Okay, I'm going to show you a few of the other different shapes we've got. So like what I just showed you here was just the standard straight ones. And I probably use those 95%, probably more, unless there's those really unique carvings where you have to get into awkward areas. But I'm going to show you some of the other options. This is what's called a long bent. Do you see there's a little bit of a bend to it, right? And this is just if you're trying to get into a deeper area and a straight one just gets caught. So I honestly, this tool, I have it. I've never ever used it. It's up on my shelf and it's gonna go back up there. I guess you get used to certain tools and I've never used it. It gets a little awkward because when you're carving it, you have to lift it quite high off the wood in order to remove and actually get it to cut. So this is really more if you're trying to get into some deeper areas that's just too awkward. Like maybe if you're carving a shell and you're trying to, carve a very awkward area, you would use that. Now there's other ones, there's spoon bent, which I probably use more when you're talking about specialty gouges, the spoon bent. If you take a look at that, it's got a curve this way and then a curve that way. All right. The main one that main time I usually use this is when I'm carving a ball and claw foot and you got this kind of awkward area right here. And just, you get to a point where if you're using a regular straight one, it would get caught on the surface of that and just stop right there and wouldn't go any further. This allows you to access certain areas. All right, and there's a couple different shapes of them. That's kind of an interesting one. The profile of it just strengthens the size and see the shape of that is interesting. But this is an antique one. Okay, so different sizes, smaller one. And then the other one is what's called a back bent. Okay, so it's similar to the spoon bent. All right, we've got a similar curve, but the blade is actually in reverse. Okay, so a spoon bent is curved this way. The back bent is curved this way, right? And the bevel is actually on the top of the tool, right? And that's where if you're carving across the surface and it's, again, just a little awkward to get to certain areas, this is one of those times when it's just the only one that will work. Again, I probably have used this tool maybe 5 times in the history of having it. So yeah, it's not a real, usually those spoon bent, the awkward shaped ones, the specialty shaped ones, don't come off my, my tool wall very often, but when you need them, they're great. Okay, any questions before I carry on?
Okay.
Okay, let me just get these out of the way. I'm going to go over some sharpening. How are we doing for time? Because I don't actually have a clock on my screen now. Are we,
Mayor, you're fine. It's 7:55. You're fine.
okay,
Everything
well,
sounds good.
I'm going to quickly go through the sharpening process, and I really would like to actually get into some carving. So am I pushing it?
No, you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, sometimes the sharpening itself can take a little bit. All right. So what I use is I use diamond stones, and you can use pretty much whatever you have. You can use water stones, you can use Arkansas stones, anything like that. But what I've used, you can use the Arkansas, did I say that already? Anyway, Arkansas water stones. But what I have here, I've got 1200 grit, or it's also called extra fine. And I've got the 8000 or extra fine. And what I normally do when I get to the point where I need to sharpen my gouges, I start with the 1200 and then I move to the 8000 for that very final honing and that polishing. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and show you the process at this point. Okay, so whether you use, Arkansas or anything like that, you want to start, you want to finish with a very, very fine stone. If you finish with a stone that actually scratches the back of the tool, the bevel on the tool, then it's probably not smooth enough. So you really want to create a mirror finish. Now, you can use Windex. I've actually heard that Windex works really well with water stone or with the diamond stones, and it doesn't create the potential rust that water does. I just use water and I just make sure it's wiped off. But I've heard that Windex works really well. Now I want to show you a technique that I use. And this is using a Sharpie. And if you cover the back side with a Sharpie, let it dry. And let me see if I'm going to redirect this so you can actually see how I'm positioned there. Actually see what's going on. Okay, so you can see, hold on. Let me make this a little bit larger. I'm not sure how that's actually showing up, so let me know if you can't see that, but I want to close up and then I want to show you how I'm positioned. So, so what I do is I do a very gentle rocking of the tool, okay, until I can feel a flat. And then I take my hand, lock my elbow, and then I just move side to side and I do a rotation of the tool, all right? So whatever curvature of the tool it is, whatever sweep, you just want to make sure you're going from side to side and you're rotating it. Okay, and these two fingers right there, those are the ones that I'm actually pressing against, and that's what's pressing against the stone. Okay, so if you look back at that, you can see the marker is gone except for the tip. So I probably need to raise it up a little bit more so that it actually gets the whole bevel flat. So I want it flat from there all the way to the tip. Okay, that marker technique really, really helps. Just making sure that it's nice and flat. Okay, so you do that for 10 or 12 hours. No, just kidding. Not really. No, the diamond stones are really, they're really fast actually. Probably sped up the time that I was sharpening, probably, or cut it in half with the amount of time because it's pretty aggressive. Okay, so we are way fast forwarding here. Oops, sorry, I'm losing things. Okay, so once you do that, so you do work on that on the 1200, and you get a little wire edge along the inside edge. Okay, so you bring the wire edge, so you can sometimes feel it with your fingernail. Then you move to the 8000. All right, so you do the same thing for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. All right, and moving it back and forth, and what that's doing is just kind of refining it, polishing it, getting that mirror image. All right, and then I go with slipstones. And there's a variety of shapes. You can buy them very thin, very small, different. Normally they come in Arkansas stones, but these, since I'm using water, I'm just going to use water with this, that you find one that fits. And normally what I do is I actually hold it up. So I'm just going to bear with me 1 second while I rearrange the views, because I want to show you how I look at this. So what I do is I actually hold this in front of me and I move the stone up and down, because that's going to give me a view, making sure that it's hitting right at that edge, right? Then I put it back on the stone, and so it's back and forth, inside, outside. Okay, so put it back on the stone to the same position, and what it's doing is just bringing that wire edge inside and outside, and then I can go back and, all right, and it's taking that little wire edge, flipping it back and forth until it falls off. And once
Mary?
that, yes,
When you're holding the slipstone, do you hold it so it's in contact thoroughly with the inside face of the gouge, or do you put any angle or bevel onto it?
it depends on what the tool is. I've got a lot of them that have an inside bevel already on, so I basically have to kind of follow along what is there. I don't purposely add an inside bevel, if that's what you mean. I don't purposely angle it to create an inside bevel. What I do is, the reason I do this when my eye is like that, I can actually see if there's a gap there. I'm looking at it from this side, and if there is a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a just a dark spot there, I can angle it slightly to close in that gap. Okay, and with all the tools that I have back there, I have so many that just vary in that. Some have a slight inside bevel, some have a very aggressive one, some don't have any. So you just have to kind of, work with each one. And that's why I like to position it like this so I can really see. And they do vary greatly. And especially when you're dealing with antique tools, you never know how they've been sharpened. There are some people who purposely, as soon as they buy their chisels, they purposely grind an inside bevel. I don't do that. I just kind of use them as they are. But there's been like international wars over that one. Do you put an inside bevel or not? Okay, where was I? So slipstone. Now I want to move to the leather strop. All right, this is just it's my portable one. And this is just a piece of leather. It's got just a sharpening, polishing compound on it. This is silicone carbide powder. You can use anything out there. Anything that you would put on a buffing wheel will work. So I just take this and just drag it back. And I quite often use this just to touch things up, just to really, if I'm carving and I'm just starting to feel like it's getting a little bit dull, before I go take it to the stone, I try taking it back on the leather and hoping that it might just bring it back. And then I also have this, which is something that I made, and this actually turn the tool over so that you can do the inside. And basically the position that I have this way is the same position that I had the slipstone. Okay, so if it's too high like that, it's going to actually create a little bit of a inside bevel. And actually that's probably going to dull the chisel if I lift it. If I lift it too high, angle it like that. All right, it's just going to blunt that. So you really want to have that quite flat across there. And this is just leather attached to a couple of different various radiuses. And then I just use that green honing compound and just rub it across the surface. Okay, so basically at that point, it is pretty sharp. Now this is always the big struggle is sharpening a V-chisel. And I will go over this as quickly as I can. But the V-chisel, because there are two flat sides, okay? Let me just slide this here so I don't, oops, other way. Okay, so we've got two flat sides, flat side coming down to a V, all right? So how I do this is I just sharpen it as if it's a flat chisel on that side, bring it to the wire edge along the inside, turn it over, and flat side. Okay, so flat chisel, flat chisel. Okay, now if you do that, what happens is, this is my prop here, my giant V-chisel. Okay, if you see what happens, the inside of the V-chisel has a little bit of a radius, a very slight radius, but enough of a radius to cause problems, okay? Because when you think about it, you've got a flat chisel, which if you remove enough metal, it actually forms a sharp corner. And you see this thickness there, that is what causes the problem. So you've got an inside radius, it's very, very slight, hardly noticeable, but it's there. And then you've got a sharp outside corner. You've got this little triangle of thickness of metal, which actually results in a little point of metal sticking out the front. So in order to get that correct, you turn it over, you turn the fancy prop over, and you round over the outside edge as if it was a tiny gouge. So you're basically taking this and sharpening it as if it's a tiny gouge, making the outside radius match the inside radius. Okay, it really is usually one of the most difficult things with the V-chisel. So let's just see. So we got flat chisel, and then the outside radius, and just very, very slight, right? Rotating it as if it was a tiny gouge and bringing this outer corner a little bit of a radius. Okay, you just have to keep an eye on it. And then the inside, use the same thing as slipstone. And this is where you use the corner side of the slipstone. And you do the same thing, flat side, right into the corner, flat side. Okay, and again, I like to do that up here too, but just for your, so you can see what's going on. Just the closer you can put it to your eyes, the easier you can stay in control of what's happening with it. Okay, so inside, and then you just go back and forth, inside, outside. Okay, so excuse me, that is usually the issue that comes up. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen with a V-chisel, but that's usually the main one. And then we can do the slipstone, or sorry, slipstone, the leather strop, flat chisel, and then the corner. And you can have this actually is just plain wood with a little bit of that honing buffing compound on it. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Are there any questions with the sharpening? Because I would really, really like to, if I have time, I'd like to do a bit of carving. You okay?
Yes, we're good. Oh, you better do some carving.
Okay, okay. Ooh, threats. All right, let me just clear away my mess. Gonna get me out of that way, covering up too much space. Where is that? Okay, so this is actually one of the chapters in the Acanthus leaf book. This is the Renaissance design. And so, as I was saying before about how I use and how I brace my hand against the wood and just really get good control over it because of that. Okay, and I can use it bevel side up or bevel side down. And as long as the tool is really sharp, you should be able to do some nice detail, you know, just depending on how you're actually using it. So now this is going to be rounded. And as I said, using it, using right and left hand, just in this one little detail here, I go back and forth right and left hand quite a lot because of the grain direction. Now, when I do something like this, I quite often refer to carving the donut. And you probably remember the donut lesson because it may sound very simple, but it tells you what direction you can and cannot go in with the grain direction. And try to find it. I can. Here we go. This is the donut lesson. Okay, so if we're talking about the grain going in this direction, all right, you carve in this direction up to there, that direction to there, that direction to there, that direction to there. And that's for the outside of the donut. It is the very first lesson that I actually did when I was a student, and I still refer back to the donut, the haunting of the donut. So now I torture my students through that, but it is really, really a good lesson. And just doing a simple thing like that, a seemingly simple thing like that, like rounding a ball on the end of there are certain directions that you just simply cannot go. And so the donut is a really, really good lesson for that. Okay, and then I'm going to take, this is going to be a hollowed out area. And then come back in this direction because I had to switch it. Just trying to make sure I don't block the camera. And come right there where the grain switches and come right down there. Okay, and then for doing details on this, I'm going to take my V-chisel. And you can do just a center vein line down there. It's right there. Okay, so these are just a lot of the details of the fabulous acanthus leaf. And the funny thing is, when I teach a class on carving the acanthus leaf, I hear reports that after you actually discover what an acanthus leaf is, you see them everywhere. They even go back to their house and say, wow, I didn't realize that lamp had an acanthus leaf on the base. And yes, the haunting of the acanthus leaf. And when my family and I went to Europe, about 6 months before my acanthus leaf book was to be published, we ran around Europe and my entire family was saying, hey, there's another one. Hey, there's another one here. Come over here. So I got them all trained.
Mary, is there an actual biological thing as an acanthus leaf?
Yes, good question. I'm so glad you asked. There is. I got a picture of it right at the very beginning. It is actually a real plant. It's kind of like a thistle. All right, there we go. You see that? It's kind of like a thistle, right? So it's kind of spiky leaves, has a center stem, and then all of these different lobes coming out the side. They have this is actually considered a nuisance plant in Italy and Greece. So it's kind of like our thistle. Actually, if you look at that, that's a full plant of it. I tried to grow one in my garden, but I killed it because that's what I do. I can carve it, but I can't grow it. So I'm just going to turn this around so you can see it a little bit differently. And so, you can see some of the details on this. This is the center of the plant down here, and then each of the lobes flows over. So you can kind of see a resemblance, but I'll tell you what, the carved and the design of the acanthus leaf has evolved so much from the original, but it was based on an original, based on a real plant.
When you're carving, if you were to try to add, to try to finish this, how frequently do you use sandpaper versus right off the chisel or whatever you carved?
Well, I'll tell you what, I try not to sand it. All right. When you're talking about details like this area and these sharp edges and these nice sharp V cuts, if I would go over that surface with a piece of sandpaper, it would kind of lose a lot of definition. So I usually do try not to, for several reasons, because I mean, if you use traditional sandpaper, it's going to leave grit in the wood. And if you ever are tempted to carve again and recarve after you've sanded, it terribly, terribly dulls your chisels. Okay, so however, I want to show you something. There is a new kind of sandpaper. If you guys have done enough woodworking out there recently, there's this thing called Mirka. All right, if you're familiar with this, amazing stuff. It's a mesh sandpaper that does not leave grit. Okay, so I would really recommend, if you do sand any of your carvings, use this. Mirka Abranet is called. They range anywhere from 50 grit all the way up. But the problem with the problem with sanding is once you start sanding one area, you kind of have to do the whole thing because it affects the whole surface and texture of the wood. And I just don't like sanding. So I just prefer not to sand and I prefer to carve more than sand. So I try to get to the point where it's just, you try to get a nice smooth surface with the gouge itself. But yeah, you won't be like kicked out of the wood carving club or anything like that if you decide to sand your carvings. I know I actually have a couple lessons where I'm just horrified at the fact of sanding, but no, I'm not that much of a purist. I just don't like it myself.
Say, Mary,
Yes.
you're using chisels and gouges now. Do you ever use knives when you're carving like this?
You know what? Just because I've never been trained using knives, you certainly can if you're comfortable using knives. But again, the technique that I use, it's much more comfortable for me and it's more controlling. But yeah, I mean, if you know how to use knives and you're more comfortable with that it works just the same. It's just how I learn and how I was taught. So the only time I use knives on occasion, like if I have to turn it over and maybe do a little bit of knife cutting, maybe some undercutting.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, I'm not comfortable doing that because that's always when I cut myself.
All right, thank you.
Mary, a question regarding sanding. In the Grinling Gibbons book, they mentioned the use of, I think it was called Dutch rush, which is horsetail rush. Have you ever experimented with using that instead of sandpaper?
I have not. No, I have not. And I'm assuming that probably is, they don't have to worry about the grit being left with that. Yeah, I don't think there would be anything. But I also heard, what is it? What's it? Not shark skin or
Yes, shark skin.
Yeah, shark skin or stingray skin or something.
Yep. Yeah.
But I've heard that is also, it stays working for a long time. It doesn't wear out. But no, I have not had an opportunity and I don't even know where I would find that. All right, and do a little detail. You see where this kind of gives a little bit of a curl around that. Tell me when we can stop. I'm just going to keep going until you tell me to stop. So just sort of, do that hint of it's bedtime.
No, we got a few more minutes.
All right, so now I'm going to make this little curl right here. And this is a real significant detail for the kind of Rococo style design. And just carve a detail out like that. And it makes it look like it's just the tip of that leaf just curling right around. Whoa, dropping things. feeling a little crowded here. Okay, so that's a real typical detail. So when you're talking about like these details here, where it's got the leaf curling around and you've got this style of this kind of tucking around and overlapping. And all right, so let's see, V-chisel, where is that?
Barry, how do you decide when you're going to change tools or try and work with the tool that's in your hand and sort of I maybe use more of the corner or fit the natural shape of the curve you're working with?
That's a very good question. I think I determine a lot of it on whether I'm too lazy to pick up another gouge or not at the time. There's a big part of me that says, okay, that tool is in my hand and can I make it happen? Yeah, let's see. And I try, and if it doesn't, then I try to use another one that fits a little bit more. But I think, I mean, on the average lesson, I quite often don't use more than 5, 6, maybe 7 at the most gouges, because there are ways you can use one size in many, many different ways. And so and it's not always the exact tool that is necessary. You can make it work. Let's say, for instance, let's round over this part here. This is quite a flat gouge. This is number 3, but I can take that and I can round over that. Even though it doesn't fit exactly, I can take little segments and make that more round than it actually is. Okay, so you can do a lot of that kind of tricking, and so the actual choice of the tool doesn't necessarily have to be exact, is all I'm saying. I would love to teach a class where I have, like, it's a big complicated class where I choose 3 gouges and try to do everything with those 3 gouges. And what it would do is it would help people to realize that you're not limited with the size or the shape of the gouge. You're not limited with it. You can really do some amazing detail work from a tool that doesn't necessarily look like it should fit. Okay, so a lot of what I did, all of the details here, pretty much use the number 314 for doing arcing there, rounding over that. It was the tool I had in my hand and it was convenient. So I hope that answered that question. I'm not sure if I actually answered.
Definitely. And I'm assuming your tools are always totally sharp at every cut, and you never run into a point where you go, okay, I should change tools. It's time to sharpen.
Very, very handy to have a few extras. And like I said, I probably don't use more than 10 on even as like really complicated projects. I only have maybe 10, 12 on my bench at the time. So yeah, it's a little excessive. So yeah, if one gets dull, I can put it aside and then, carve and spend like 2 days straight sharpening all my chisels. So not recommended, but it happens.
One other question, Mary.
Yes.
When you're doing most of this work now by hand, at what point do you switch to using the mallet? How do you weigh the task at hand, whether you use a mallet or you're just going by hand?
Okay. Great question. The thing is, I use my mallet if I'm really doing some major shaping of it and I've got a thick piece and I really want to just get a lot of wood out. That's when I use a mallet and for really heavy pounding. And also if I'm using really hard wood, if I'm using oak or really dense hard walnut, I do a lot of that for the roughing out. Okay, so for using just the heavy pounding and just removing the bulk of the wood that way. And that's usually right at the very beginning that I use that, especially if you're doing some deeper carving like this. And then I also use that mallet, like I showed you, that light tapping, and that would be for, let's say, using the V-chisel. Let me just grab that. So if you're wanting to do some really delicate controlled work, and I'll show you here. I'll do it here. So if you're trying to, I don't know if I'm gonna, so if you're trying to do some really, here, I'll do this one. If you're trying to do some really twisting cuts like this, right? All right, so that has a nice little twist to it, but that cut, that really tight curve is very difficult to do if you're pushing through. The V chisel wants to slit. It wants to either, not quite follow along if you're pushing. But if you're using a mallet and that very light tapping, it's easier to control and go around those little tight, oops, sorry, my elbow in the way. Okay, so it just controls it a little bit nicer and you can do it a little cleaner cut with that. And that's actually probably the best example of where to do that, because I use that a lot when you have those twisting around. So going back to this one, a lot of these details, those V cuts, would be that very light tapping and controlling them around that very, very tight curves. Okay. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, Mary, I have a
Yes.
question.
How are you going to handle those, the edges, which are now, they're at a 90-degree angle to the backing? Do you do much to them at all?
Yeah, I don't like having those vertical edges. It's just kind of bulky. So I do what I call undercutting. And that's basically, if you can see this, basically taking gouges like that, all right, and do an angle cut down, right? And you can approach it from whichever direction you can, and just to knock off that vertical edge. What you can also do is flip this over. It's at this point, it's kind of floppy and doesn't really hold sturdy. So you have to kind of put it on either maybe some foam or something like that and try to clamp it. I don't necessarily like to do that because it's not really secure. But from this point, you can do most of this. Take a gouge and you can do most of these, little bit of an undercut. Once you really want to do this only when you know you're completely finished with the top, because if you decide, oh wait, I want to take that one down a little bit further, well, you've already started to shape the back side. So, you really want to make sure you're pretty confident you're finished with the shaping. Then you can come back in and approach it from the side. And it really is more kind of nibbling away at it. It's kind of an awkward thing because you're kind of having to come, at it from all different directions. But it is something that definitely it's important to not necessarily have those real, the original saw cuts. So you do want to go around and thin those down a bit. And just, it doesn't have to be that much of an angle, excuse me, but just enough so you don't see the vertical wall. I wanted to mention, I'm doing a live stream every Tuesday, and if you're interested, it's a Twitch channel, and I am actually attempting to do a Grinling Gibbons style design. This, let me see if I can do this. Well, it's actually flipped over. Oh, is it going to come off easy? Yeah, there we go. This is actually the front side. Okay, so I've been doing this about 4 weeks now, and I do it an hour every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And so this is the front. And in order to do that undercutting, I've got this flat surface there. I tape the flat surface because this is a layered carving. I'm going to have another layer on there, but I've got this nice flat surface. I can tape it. And you see how I've done the back cutting there? It's really causing the leaves to, oops, I didn't do that side yet. Here we go. It's really causing the leaves to look a lot lighter and a lot thinner. I've got a ways to go, but it really thins it down. And so this is actually a really good example of what you're asking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tuesday, 1 o'clock, every Tuesday, 1 o'clock Eastern at the Twitch channel. Go on my website and it'll show you how to get to it. It's a live stream that I'm slowly working through that whole project. So.
Mary, I did have a question. Excellent presentation. Could you say something about your video setup? I think it's one of the best we've ever seen as far as quality goes.
Oh, sure. You're talking about what we have right here.
Yeah, your cameras. I know you use OBS, and on a MacBook, but what about the lighting and the cameras?
Well, this is my studio.
Right.
So it's really, I've got the big square studio lights for my filming, because this is where I do all of my video recording. So I've got about 4 big lights up here, but I've got a camera here and a camera here, and they're both angled down. And I actually haven't switched this, but look, this is cool. You can actually switch angles. I love it. I've got this thing here. It's called can you see that?
Okay.
ATEM switcher. Okay. And that's where both the cameras are plugged in, and it goes from side to side. I can give you more information on it if you're looking for it. That runs, it was around $300 for the switcher, but I've been doing so many live streams and so much video that it's worth it. And so these are just standard. You can use any kind of cameras, really. Even the DSLR cameras, they do video now.
Right.
But yeah, it's hardwired into that. And then I use with a program called OBS, which is, I keep forgetting what it's called, what it stands for, something Open Broadcasting System, something like that. And that brings all the cameras together, and I'm just screen sharing that.
Okay.
So.
Impressive. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a long learning curve.
Yeah.
All right, should I stop share here? And we'll go back.
All right, well, does anybody have any questions while Mary's here before we finish up and move on? Because my batteries are running out here in the shop. But Mary, everything is good. And you know what? We can never, especially for those that are new to carving, we can never learn everything in an hour. The basic thing is to turn people on to carving, get them on your website if you're interested. There's so much I learned, especially when I was with you and others, about reading the grain, carving it. You know, some woods carve better than others. So there's just so much to learn, but you have a great job. Is there any questions for Mary?
Actually, I have one. You
Yes.
had mentioned using mahogany. What are your thoughts on sapele?
Hate it.
I like it that much.
Sapele, it goes in so many different directions, and it's hard. I find whenever I do carve sapele, and they sort of lump it into mahogany nowadays.
That's why the question.
I have to carve almost across the grain almost the whole time.
Okay.
Because if you carve with the grain, it'll change on you about every 1/4 of an inch. So the only way to control it is to carve across the grain. And yeah, it's frustrating.
Okay, thank you.
Don't do it.
Mary, one other question. How would you split, how do I ask this? As a professional carver, how do you split your time between work for clients versus your teaching? I mean, how do you make money? That basic question. I mean, you're obviously extremely skilled. You're an excellent teacher. It's fascinating to watch, but how do you make it work? How do you make it work?
Let's put it this way. On a normal year, this is not a normal year. On a normal year, I usually do about 1/3 commissions, 1/3 doing my online school where I make the videos, and then 1/3 going out and teaching, and actually in-person teaching. It is usually a really nice, even balance, which keeps everything interesting. But this year has just been crazy. It's been way off balance with that. But usually when I hear people say they're very, very excited about, quitting their job and taking up wood carving full time, I say, stop. Hold back. You might want to be decide to be married to an independently wealthy person first, because it's not easy, but I would not have it any other way. The thing that has allowed me to do it is flexibility, because you just have to sort of, whatever comes through the door, say, yeah, okay, I'll figure out how to do that. But as I said, on a normal year, it's usually balanced out quite nicely, where I teach outside of here, I go and travel, so I get my traveling bug filled, and basically once a month go teaching somewhere, and then I do the videos. And then when I'm home working, I have commission jobs, not overwhelming. If one of those three would completely take over, I think I'd get probably burnt out. But it's, if you can sort of get a nice little balance. As I said, when I first started doing the online school, it's not good having a wood carver bored, because she still wants to carve and she has to figure out how to carve. So we make it work.
Mary, not a question, but just a comment. I've taken a class with you, a weekend class at Connecticut Valley School. And then like a year and a half ago, I broke a few bones in my foot. So, I'd really, what am I going to do? But I signed up for your online carving class for like 4 months. And it was wonderful, because you just take that laptop or iPad, which is the iPad I used, in the basement, and set it up. And I was able to basically mimic a lot of your carvings. And you know what? That was invaluable. And if anybody, the reason I'm sharing that is, if anybody's really thinking about, trying to get started, that online video is just wonderful. And there's such a variety of different, different options, from very beginner to more advanced. So highly, highly recommended if anybody's interested.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've always heard that the online videos, the fact that you can stop and replay and stop and, go over certain things, over and over, and just to sort of get the technique down. It's helped a lot of people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was invaluable. And, just watching your hand movements, it's almost as good as being in a person-to-person class. So it was very good.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Next time I break some bones, I'm going to sign back up again.
Don't do that.
Just don't have time at the moment.
Any more questions?
Should I stop screen share? Yeah.
There we go. Well, no more questions. All right. Well, Mary, it's a real pleasure and an honor to have you visit us, and hopefully everybody will send out the link to your website tomorrow. And if you have not checked out Mary's website, please do so. And some of the work that she has done and her commissions she's worked on, and also her many classes she has to offer. It's really nice. And I like your tool rack on the back. And I asked Mary when I saw you yesterday, what a great idea, hanging some magnetic strips to hold your tools. And it looks really nice there. It's a great idea.
It's sort of nice display too, just sort of like it's my babies.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move on. We're going to go to Mark now. He's going to share some. You're welcome to hang on or sign out if you want to. I don't know what your plans are.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Mary, it's been a pleasure. Take care. Until next time we meet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
All right, Mark, you
Thank
want
Just bring it just to work. It's always a challenge,
So how you been, Mark? Good?
Yeah.
Good. How is your foot now? Are you fully recovered there?
Yeah, no, that was a long time ago. It just took a long time to heal, but now I'm totally recovered. So can everybody see this or not yet?
Yes,
Yes.
All right.
there we go.
So I'm just going to go through this slide deck that I put together, and I'll just talk to it as I'm going through it. And you know, if you guys got questions, you know, just fire them off. What got me thinking about this, I don't know if Lance is on, but last week, you know, or last month, he demonstrated using a dado blade without an insert, and it looked a little risky. So anyway, that's the first thing I kind of want to talk about. So the first thing is, like, when you're ripping wood, a splitter is really invaluable, and the splitter is on the back side of the blade. And each table saw manufacturer is a little different on, you know, how you can adapt a splitter to it. You know, the one I have is a Powermatic, and it's got a clamp inside. You just put a splitter in there when you need it. Because what can happen, anybody's used a table saw a lot, they probably have a hole in the wall right behind where you stand from kickback. And what happens is, you know, when that blade's spinning, the front of the blade, which is close to where you're standing, is going down. So that's trying to push the wood down to the table. So there's no problem there. But the back of the blade is coming up, kind of where that splitter is. And when you're ripping something, if there's tension in the wood and you don't have a splitter, it can close up and grab around the blade and basically send it into a projectile. So, you know, none of the books really talk about that, but it's, you know, it's very dangerous. So it's important when you're ripping, you know, to have some sort of a splitter on the back side. And this is a combination blade. If you're doing a lot of ripping, actually, just for efficiency, to put on a rip blade, which, you know, has a different grind, but it's just less teeth overall, and it just runs a little cooler. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a safety thing on for ripping. Go to the next one. So this is the kind of, I could say, zero clearance inserts, and you can buy these for every table saw, but literally they're like $30 each, and you can make them just as easily. You know, my insert's about 3/8 of an inch. So I got some 3/8 inch or 9mm Baltic birch plywood. I got it from Woodcraft, which, you know, is not the cheapest place, but you don't need a lot of wood to do this. And I'll kind of show you the process for making these, which, you know, is really pretty straightforward. And this is just a shot underneath, and I just have small brass screws, and basically they're just levelers, because the 3/8 of an inch thickness is a little thinner than what you need. So you just put some screws underneath, and you can, you know, raise them or lower them, so you can kind of get the insert level with your tabletop. So what I did was, I go back one more here. What I did up on top is my steel splitter that came with the saw. So basically I laid it on a piece of 3/8 inch Baltic birch plywood. I drew a you know, circle around it, cut it out on a bandsaw, so it's, you know, a rough template. I used the double face carpet tape, taped it to my pattern, and then I just used, you know, the standard pattern routing bit. And this is set up in a router table, but you could do it with a handheld router too. And so you just basically duplicating the outside profile to what that splitter is. And, you know, it takes a little time to do this, but you might as well make 4 or 5 so you don't have to keep going back to the, you know, to the same operation each time. Like I said, if anybody has questions, because, you know, it's kind of hard to envision what I'm doing from these slides, you know, fire them away. So from there, you've got your insert. But the problem is most blades, they won't drop down in the saw low enough to go below the insert. So what I have here, after I've shaped this, you know, I did some final sanding and got it to fit into the insert. I took the blade out. I got it to fit into the hole where it was going. But then I got to raise the blade up into it. And like I said, on my saw, my blade won't go low enough. So basically I have this new insert. I'm going to call it the virgin insert because it hasn't been cut through yet. Double face taped on top of the metal insert that's in the saw itself. And I've got some hold downs there, you know, just some way to jury rig it so it's not going to move around on you. And then what I'm going to do, the next operation is to raise the blade up through the saw. So this thing is temperamental here. But what I'm doing is, you know, I just turned the saw on and I raised it up. And so I'm cutting through here. And what this is giving you is like a zero clearance. So now you've got a clean cut and there's benefits from that. So this is another picture. If you're going to rip thin stock, this is a 7¼ inch blade in my big table saw. If you're going to rip real thin stock, this is a very efficient and safe way to do it. And then that splitter that you can see there, that's basically 3 pieces of veneer that are just glued together. And what I did to find out where that spot is, you know, obviously the saw's off. I put a straight edge next to the blade on each side and drew like parallel lines. So everything is kind of in alignment. And then I just went to the drill press and I drilled, you know, holes where that insert's going to go. And then I went over to the jigsaw and just ran a blade through there and cut it. And it's a little fussy, but basically you're just fitting a splitter into this zero clearance insert. Is everybody understanding what I did there? So basically you're just making a zero clearance insert because you're using this for ripping. But it's, like I said, it's efficient and a safe way to do it, although it takes a little time to go through this exercise.
Mark?
Yeah.
Why is a smaller diameter blade safer? Couldn't you just lower your regular 10-inch blade or?
Yeah. Well, you're cutting a thinner kerf.
Okay.
And I don't know. I just think it's you know, there's just not as much mass spinning around.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for smaller stuff, I just think it's a little easier to work with.
Okay.
I mean, it may not be necessarily safer, but it's just, I think it's just a little more, a little easier to work with. And this, what I've got laying up on top of the saw is a push block. So if you're trying to rip a really thin piece of wood, well, there's a safe way to do it. You just make this rip, you know, this push block out of a piece of MDF or plywood. So, and ideally you want to be a little higher so it's over the top of the rip fence. And when you run it through there, you know, obviously your right hand is holding the wood against the rip fence. You want to start off with a thick piece of wood. And then that push block is like right on top of the blade. And you can just go along and safely cut thin material without putting your hands near the blade.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it takes a little time, you know, to go through this exercise, but it's well worth it if you're going to rip thin stock. And you can get, you know, you can get almost like a plain cut off the blade, especially, well, that's another thing too. These blades are really cheap, you know, that's those Freud, I think that's what it is from the Home Depot or whatever they are. So, you know, you can get a blade that's sharp and, you know, just use it occasionally for a little bit of ripping, whatever you're doing. So that's just kind of another way to safely, you know, rip thin material. Going to move along here. So this is a rip fence I have. So say you want to cut something on edge. You know, a lot of times like the top of a table, you've got like an undercut bevel. And, you know, trying to stand that up against a fence that's only 3 inches high is very dangerous. So this design which I got out of one of the magazines, I guess, allows you to just clamp right to your existing rip fence. And those spacer blocks are just there to give clearance for the clamps. And you can see there's a cleat, and I'll show that in another picture on the backside. Just a piece of wood inserted in there, and there's a reason for that because this is kind of a dual purpose thing. So this is the other side of it, and well, this is with the cleat with the thing on. So it's basically a tenon cutter. It'll allow you to cut tenons with this, and that thing just straddles on that piece of plywood. And I'm trying to use like a Baltic birch, something that's got a lot of plies to it, so it's pretty dimensionally stable. Because a lot of plywood, once you cut it, it becomes a banana. So really got to try and use material that's good here. And then here's a shot of the other side. So if you can envision, geez, doesn't want to stay. If you can envision wanting to cut some tenon shoulders, or not shoulders, but cut some tenon pieces off, you can move the rip fence back and forth, and you just put your material in front of that sliding block, and you can, you can pretty efficiently cut, tenons. So let me go to the next picture and you'll see. So this is kind of a close-up of what I'm doing. Now, the only thing I would say is you really want to use a rip blade for this, not a combination blade. And if you want to go through the trouble, you can put a toggle clamp on this to hold the material in place. And you could run the piece of wood behind it down further so you don't get any blowout. But for the majority of what I'm doing, this thing works pretty well. And you can buy a dedicated tenoning jig for like $100, but you can make one of these things, and then it's kind of dual purpose for what what you may use it for. Any questions before I move on?
Mark, I just wanted to point out that I think that particular fence and sliding tenoning piece is a Steve Latta jig, and you can actually get the plans for it, I believe, off Fine Woodworking's website.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, that's probably where I did see it. But it's relatively easy to build, and it's pretty versatile because you got that high fence to begin with too. So let's see if I can get back in one picture. So this is a dedicated sled to cut 45 miters, and it works very well. And we'll talk about how I built it when we look at some of the other sleds. But basically, if the piece of MDF that that's sitting closest to us is a square 45, a square 45, even if you have it off just a little, you cut one on one side, one on the other, you're going to have a miter that's going to line up. So if you're going to do any picture frames or anything, I find this very quick and repeatable to get accurate 45 cuts. Some of the features is you want that back fence to be really tall, because sometimes you're going to have a wide miter you got to cut through, and you need some bulk there to hold that plywood together, the base of it. And you can build this as big or as small, that for what you're doing. If you're just making, little stuff, you can make it a lot smaller. So it's really just customized to what, to what you're doing in your shop. But it's worth, in my opinion, it's worth going through the time to do this, because it's going to pay dividends later on when you have some miters to cut. And here's just a shot of kind of what it's going to look like. So I've seen where people put sandpaper against the edge so the piece you're cutting can't slip, which honestly is a good idea, because when you're cutting on a 45, there's pressure pushing back, and it kind of wants to make that wood move back on you. So I haven't done that, but I need to, because I've had, you know, some cuts that move a little. It's safe because it's pushing back, but then it, you know, you're going to have to take another cut off it. So just a kind of another recommendation there. So this is the bottom of that sled. And those runners, you really want to use quarter sawn stock, because from summer to winter, you can get that to fit tight. Say if you get it to fit tight in the winter, well, in the summer, it's probably not going to slide very well because it can expand just a little more. But by using the quarter sawn stock, you're going to minimize that, you know, that movement. And I definitely wax these runners. So now I've seen an article recently where people abandon doing this, and they're using 2 miter gauges. They're just taking miter gauges that you can fasten to the back and just putting the miter gauge on there. And it's kind of a good idea because it's fussy getting these runners to line up. And we can talk about a little bit how I do that at the end. So here's just another crosscut sled I have. And when I'm, you know, I don't really use the crosscut miter gauge hardly at all anymore. I just find that this is so much faster, more accurate. This is a kind of a long one, and I've got a wider one for cutting bigger panels. But basically, you know, you've got a front and a back rail that's supporting the plywood, because obviously you've cut through it. So that rail's got to be heavy enough, but you can make it up out of whatever material you have. And you can see where I've just used, you know, multiple pieces here to save material. And, you know, it's got the 2 runners underneath that are quarter sawn. And the real fussy part with this is, well, let's talk about putting the runners in too. And it's a little hard to explain this, you know, rather than seeing it. But what I do is, you know, I fit those runners. They're like 3/8 of an inch by 3/4. I fit them to the slots. So, you know, they're pretty good. And you want to pick real straight stock so you're not fighting it. And then you lay the sled on top of it, and you get it as close as you can, you know, referencing the back of the saw. And I usually just glue it on initially, and then I'll turn it over and put these screws in to hold the runners. And you run the blade through. And what's critical is the fence closest to us. That has to be perfect 90 degrees to that blade. So that, when I'm building this thing, I just screw that on. But then I take a framing square after I've cut through here, and I put the framing square up against this first saw cut you make, and then you make sure you fine tune that back fence and make sure it's perfectly straight, because that's really where the money is. If that's perfectly straight each time and those runners fit tight, each time you go back and forth, you're going to have a square, accurate cut. So it was a little hard to describe that. Any questions on how I'm doing that?
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
This is Matt. I just want to say that there's a slightly alternate method that Alan Turner uses, and he's got a whole video about it on Fun Woodworking Again. But the way he does it is he basically screws a runner to one side of the sled base.
Okay. And
he makes it oversized, so it's overhanging the blade. And without the fences on it at all, you basically rip the runner and the base together. And now what you've got is you've got a flush, perfectly zero clearance side of the sled. Then you basically take the other half on the other miter slot and you screw a runner into the bottom, another piece of MDF or plywood, and you do the same thing on the other runner. Now you've got 2 bases that are both screwed to a runner that are perfectly zero clearance to the blade. When you go to square it all up, what you do is you basically put those 2 halves, so they're roughly, even with the front of the saw, the back of the saw, whatever. And you can put the back fence on pretty much any way you want, because it doesn't matter whether that one's dead square or not. And now you got the two halves and a back fence. You got a single unit, and you can focus on getting that front fence as one piece on square to the back, to the front edge of the perpendicular. It doesn't even matter whether it's square to the back of the front of the bottoms of the sled, just that it's perpendicular to the blade. And when you get to that part, the money thing is he basically screws in the fence at one end and shoots a tiny little brad into the other end. And it's enough that you can make a test cut, and actually some yellow glue. With the glue still wet, you can make a test cut. And I don't know, there's a whole other thing about testing whether that fence is square, right? You cut a piece in half and then flip it and butt it back together and make sure you've got a perfect square again. But either way, with a brad and some yellow glue holding that front fence on, you can take a mallet and tap it either front or back to make sure that it's final aligned. Once you're happy with the test cut, you put some clamps on it and that yellow glue will set up. But the tricky part that he solved in some ways is that you can get zero clearance fit to the blade in the two halves of the saw without having to worry about the squareness of the front fence to start with.
Okay.
But it's a great video. It makes a lot of sense as a video. It's like 4.5 minutes. And it goes with an article that he wrote, but once you do it and you see the video, I got like 7 sleds now. I got one for, making 45-degree bevel cuts. I got one for making 45-degree miter cuts. I got one for dados, because once you can make a sled quickly and accurately, you'll use them for all kinds of things.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, there's YouTube, no matter what you're doing or on fine woodworking, there's videos for almost anything you're interested in doing. So, whatever works and, can get you there faster. But the critical thing is that back support needs to be at an exact right angle to the blade for repeatable cuts. So, yeah, whatever works.
And
so
that's not quite as easy as the theory suggests it is sometimes.
You're right. No question. No question. That's why these aren't glued on. These are screwed on, because if I have to, I can take the screws out and I can move it. And I just have a lot of screws in it, and you just have to make sure, you're not putting a screw where you're gonna, put the blade. But you're absolutely right. That's the devil's in the details with squaring that up. And I've got a real big one that I use if I'm cutting big panels, because you're limited on the size of your table saw. And basically what you're making is, a sliding table saw if it's big enough. And then the last thing here is just a tip. So say you're building a bunch of doors, and that one piece of mahogany that's sitting there is one of the rails, and you've screwed it up. And now you need to cut another one the exact same length. So this is the way you do it. You take one that you know is right, and you put it against a stop block, which you can see there. And then you take a sacrificial piece and you run the saw blade through it. Now, you just take that piece you've just cut off, put it against the C-clamp, put your new piece in and rip it again. And now you've duplicated the length of the piece that you need to remake. So does everybody see what I'm doing there? This is just showing a way to repeat the exact distance of a cut after you've cut it. If not, ask me the question again.
Could you run through that again, Mark?
Okay, so the piece of mahogany is the size you want. You've made a lot of rails. Say you ran one through the plane, you put a profile on it and it tore it out. So you have to make another one exactly that length. So this is a way to duplicate that. So you take one of these rails that you know is the right length, or even a damaged one. you put the clamp wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. And then you take a piece of scrap and you run it through like I'm showing there. So now in total, these two pieces of wood are going to equal the new part.
Wow.
Then when you go to cut the new part, you put the piece of cherry that's over on the right when you're looking at the screen up against the C-clamp. And then you put your new piece of mahogany, in this case, on, up next to it, and you run it through the saw, and now you got a perfect size that's going to match, the piece you're trying to duplicate.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
simple.
The penny dropped there. Thanks, Mark.
All right. It's simple, but it's fast, and just think about that. Without this method, how you got to try and get the miter gauge and figure out where the hell you are, and butt it up against the blade, and it may or may not be right. But this is a quick way of doing that. So, any questions on some of the stuff I've shown? Obviously, it's not in total, but just a few things that I use that are helpful for me. And
Mark?
yes.
Yeah, the one thing about cutting the thin strips, I think Rockler has a little fixture so that if you need to cut thin strips, you could actually cut it so that you're cutting on the left side of the blade. And so you don't have to worry about the strip getting jammed between the saw blade and the fence.
You're right. The problem is if you have to cut a lot of those, each time you cut your piece of wood, it's getting smaller. But maybe you just keep moving the rip fence over to accommodate it. I just think using that push block that I showed there, it's really safe. Your hand's nowhere near the blade.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
And if you're cutting really small stuff, a lot of times the rip fence, I've got a piece of like polypropylene or something, and there's space underneath it. So a lot of times I just have to clamp a piece of MDF there that goes all the way down to the table.
Right.
So it doesn't get caught underneath.
Right. No, I like your fixtures. It's a good idea.
Yeah, it really saves a lot of time. I mean, it takes some time to build them, but once you've done it,
On the photo, the picture that's on the screen, on that little piece up on top, is there 2 holes filled in? Is that for something for looking through there, or what is that?
yeah, just something I screwed up.
Okay.
Maybe I stripped some screws or something. So I just plugged them and put another one in.
Okay.
Because that was hard maple, and I probably snapped screws when I was putting them in.
Okay.
Nothing special. Yeah, when you're making these things, pick some straight stock, because, if that thing is going to be, say, 30 inches long, you want some straight grain wood to start with, because it doesn't do any good, to have it perfectly parallel, and then it, becomes bent just because it's kind of got a mind of its own. But you don't have to. You could use just something from your shop.
Right.
So,
Hey, Mark, to that point, it's Matt again. I would actually tell people, I used to make some of these jigs and fixtures, and I wouldn't put any finish on them. And then I'd wonder why they were moving a little bit, seasonally. And it's like any other wood. Even if you don't like working with shellac, if you get a can of spray shellac and give a couple coats to that MDF base or the plywood base and the fences, it will go a tremendously long way to keeping your sleds and other table saw fixtures from moving or not staying flat or straight over the years.
yeah, that's a good point.
And it also repels sawdust and holds wax, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right, Mark?
Yeah.
So how many more slides do you have?
That's the end. That's the end.
All right, because what I'm going to do is segue. You covered all the points. Thank you very much, Mark. And see, you got the slides on. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a milestone.
And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close out here. And actually, there was some chatter going on about the runners. So, Matt, if you can make sure that my camera's on the table saw. Can everybody see that over here? Is this on over here?
Not yet. We're looking at your ceiling.
The problem is you have to unmute the phone, the iPad, so that you can, so that we're, you guys
Okay.
switch you to the center.
How's that? Is that better?
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two windows up, say Bob Edmonds. The right one has the saw.
Okay. Here's a couple of things that Mark mentioned.
We got
Have a splitter that's removable.
How many mics is he running?
What's that?
Feedback is coming because he has two windows open.
Well, let me turn down the volume. Can you hear this now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are we good? All right, anyhow, this splitter I like because it's removable. And you can remove it and take it out. I don't know if yours was like that, Mark. So when I'm using this, I can put this on. I made this also, the throat. I made this out of a piece of wood. I just cut this out on the bandsaw, and this was cut with the saw being raised. Instead of using screws, I just put some tape here and insert it like that. And then, let me get this. And then I raise the blade, and this is a 0 for my normal blade, 1/8" kerf that I use. In addition to the fence, what I like to do is I have a feather board attached so I can just slide a board, and this helps out with the kickback too. So I use a little feather board on this. And last thing, we're going to close it, is a table saw sled that I just finished. And this is very similar, only I use the HD high density polyethylene runners. I picked up some of this. You can get this at the woodworking shows or any of the supply stores, and you cut it and mill it down. And I use the exact same method that Matt was talking about. I made this in 2 sections and put this fence on, made this fence perpendicular to the blade, tacked it, and kept adjusting it until I found it was perpendicular and put it on there. And I really like it. I just finished this a couple of weeks ago, and this is really sweet. And when it's running, you'll get a nice, what's nice about the sled here is it will protect, you'll get a nice clean edge here because you're supporting on the edge here. We'll do a sample. Put your stop. And you'll find out it makes a really nice clean cut. Safe, you're keeping your hands away from the blade. So table saw sleds are really, really important to have. And if I was doing it all over again, I don't know how you guys feel. I used the new Hammer Felder, the sliding table saw, which I think are really excellent tools if I was going to buy a new one. But this is the next best thing to have a nice table saw sled. All right. I don't know what kind of power I have. So,
Bob,
do we have
just
any questions?
one more comment. You know, the real benefit to that 0 clearance, if you're cutting cabinet grade plywood, which has a thin layer of veneer, or you're gluing up a panel, you know, you can get incredible chip out if you don't have a tight 0 clearance fence. So it's worth going through the trouble to do that. So you got a clean cut on, on any kind of plywood, honestly. Especially if you got to show an edge for what you're doing.
All right, so I think we got to go. We're running. Mark, thanks for sharing the slides. And don't forget, everybody, next month we're having Garrett Hack from up Northland and topics to be discussed, and we'll need some presenters. So if you want to share whatever you're working on, please do so. We'd like to have some more projects. Anything for the good of the order? Somebody's phone. Nope. All right. So we all good?
Okay, see you guys next month.
All right, so we
All
take
good.
care.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt and Mark and everybody for participating. We'll take you all. See you next month.
See you later.
Okay.
Bye. Happy New Year.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.